not realizing that the following few minutes would radically alter her life. She smiled as she walked in. Additionally, in a few seconds, Catherine's tears broke through the convocade, cascading down her face as the doctors disclosed a fact that no mom ought to be forced to listen. Why hasn't this test been released to the public yet? What caught the palace off guard? What does this mean for the prince and the crown Louis? Don't forget to subscribe so you make sure you stay up to date before we dive in. A closer look at what this truly means for the royal family. It began as a regular summons of the same kind Catherine had answered numerous times. No caution, no hurry, and a mild request, along with a polite tone. But the timing was strange, as though the air changed before she had taken a step. Via the door, prior to speaking, in the palace halls, people had a custom of murmuring, and the quiet was this time. It's overwhelming. The music was clinical indoors, under control, and the topic was far too serious considering what she had been. Those were commonplace problems. Indeed, the Prince Louis had been evaluated. However, she was informed that nothing but the necessary warning had been triggered, because these were cautious and regularly monitored. Developmental check-ins. The face is on, but the other side of her expressed an alternative message. Tight face gestures, intentional pauses, and well-selected sentences. Next, the language that arrived without a parent prepared. Phrases that were significant, phrases that sounded definitive. Doctors didn't make a guess. They didn't waver. They spoke as if the choice had already been created a long time ago, as if this moment had been delayed instead of located, and the weight had broken her. The awareness that something so serious had been occurring in the background, behind assurances and protocols in quiet. Catherine completely lost her calm, not gently. The sound of a loud gasp for air, a chair scraping back, suddenly reality set in, and trembling hands were later detailed by insiders. This is clear. There was a collision between astonishment and remorse, the kind that presents unsolvable questions. How could I have missed this? Who knew before me? Why now? The palace's machinery arrived, life in just a few minutes. The telephones became quiet, internal channels were closed down, conversations ceased in the midst of sentences. They issued orders, forward without explanation. Aides relocated swiftly in order to contain instead of to comfort. Add details, command your answer. Hold Catherine by herself. As she was escorted out of view, witnesses said she disappeared, pale-faced, along a hidden hallway, the burden of things and red eyes unchangeable on her shoulders. Whatever had just come to light wasn't meant to depart from those walls. Consequently, employees were instructed not to converse, not to assume, not to remember what they had witnessed. But secrets often leak via openings that at first no one takes attention, and the palace was getting ready for impact already, while Catherine was left by herself with the kind of a mother's terror that rewrites her cosmos. This moment couldn't last, buried in the past. But in order to really appreciate how serious this is, now, we must go back to the signs that were overlooked and the signs that the palace made an effort to ignore. He was the whimsical light of the palace, but below Prince Lou's cheeky grin was subtle, clues that a lot of people missed, a few ignored, while some dismissed it as a fleeting trend. Looking back, those symptoms looked terrible. Who laid to rest what were the hints? It started featuring small elements that were originally barely noticeable, quiet intervals during play that once seemed to fantasy, but now raise issues, a delay in the creation of words and examples when he lost his coordination. Prince Louis was supposed to smile at Q, and the royal schedule was filled with interactions, appearances, and planned photo shoots. But there were moments of confusion, reluctance, and doubt. The group began to notice Prince Lou's propensity can easily get fatigued at activities, waving for a short while before gripping Catherine's hand, obviously worn out. Videos from the internet showed him sleeping during ceremonies, gently blinking, and seems far. It was considered adorable by admirers. Commentators claimed that he was simply overburdened, but some insiders began to murmur it didn't feel perfectly correct. The nanny was the first to say it carefully and softly to a senior assistant aloud. She had observed the development of other children. Prince Louis was special. She noticed something: he found difficult to follow instructions, faltered, and often when overstimulated, it froze. She was showing worrying rather than fear. But the attention of the royal machine can be detrimental. It was long before Catherine heard it. They told her. She could feel it. Mothers do it every time. She felt that something wasn't quite right. Because of the strong, unacknowledged bond she gives to Prince Louis. But she was met with tight grins and cut promises every time she lifted the moment her voice wavered in worrying. Boy's development was distinct, they said. He's under a shield, they added. Spotlight. He simply needs more time. Catherine feared that the moment was not right. Ignoring it was a waste of time. Previously happy family movies recently reappeared as gloomy predictions. Prince Louis failed to respond to his name the day video. The image of him in the garden, gazing into the distance for too long, lengthy, expressionless. Catherine began reviewing them repeatedly, looking for patterns, requesting a miscommunication, but the truth simply became more obvious. Professionals had already been done covertly and softly came up. Catherine wanted assurance, responses, rather than protocol, tabloid conjecture. The assessments were directed, but they were stopped midway between the request and its execution. The pause button was intentionally struck by a person inside the castle. The reasoning seems to be clear: optics, timing, privacy, and reputation, but the cost is unacceptable. When Prince Louis fell between the fractures of a company that also cared a lot about its reputation to protect its own, and that quiet was beginning to Catherine, is the one who will break, having consistently followed the guidelines, who had learned how to live a sophisticated life under the rigorous regulation of royal duty. Additionally, the courts, just as Catherine was about to enter politics, began to insist on answers, initiating a dispute that would put royal tradition in jeopardy against the instincts of a mother. She begged for an explanation. A procedure was handed to her. Advisors who are devoted to Catherine were hindered by the monarch, not her. Behind the glittering walls, hushed pleas of the palace, what did they hold on to? Concealed. To what extent did they maintain the truth from being revealed? During the times that after the first diagnosis, Catherine was opposing an establishment instead of a disease. She wasn't asking for hardly any headlines. She was asking for further conversations and second perspectives with superior specialists compared to those the palace has made its own decision. But the answer was always no, not yet, not necessary, not suggested. And below each skillfully written denial, the identical message: hold on, be silent, hold your position. Advisors advised caution. The outcomes were known as initial. They emphasized that nothing was verified, that any error could result in a media frenzy, and that shifting routes outside the palace could increase unreasonable worries. Catherine thought it was a much more dark method of confinement. They were not looking for the truth. It was in command. Each time she looked for more clarity, she came upon delays, bureaucratic coldness, or deception. It was not just indifference. The resistance was computed. Catherine's connection with her private secretary, who had long been regarded as one of her most intimate allies, quickly declined. According to accounts, she spoke to him late one night in a quiet voice that was shaking with rage. "For what reason do you defend the company, but not my son?" She didn't get a satisfactory answer, since there were none. Constantly the emblem of Prince William was in a difficult spot. Location. He was both a future monarch and a dad. Despite his deep affection for his wife, the man was raised to work for a better good. Catherine withdrew herself against him, but according to insiders, he was cautious and often conflicted. His words were, "Please be patient," he said a prayer for confidence in the process. But she was being choked by the operation. In spite of being knowledgeable and accurate, King Charles apparently gave the order, replied in a contemptuous and even in a clinical way. He discussed accountability, narrative, and legacy. Prince Louis was never mentioned once to her, as said by Catherine, who asserted that her missions were more powerful, more than words. Queen Camilla thereafter took up residence. The shadows. In public, she remained silent. She was also unnecessary. Her influence was evident in the scenes, quietly but firmly. Many people believe that it was Queen Camilla's servants who privately suggested that the Queen was becoming difficult to manage, dissuaded further experimentation, and expressed Catherine's concerns as explosions of emotion. Whispers turned into judgments, and muttering were impacted by whispering. It wasn't just a matter of Catherine being ignored. They were keeping her quiet. The significance of tradition and control made her voice weaker, her paternal authority and her insight. Furthermore, every door she knocked on closed a little faster. She was no longer battling for solutions. She was engaged in combat for the right to ask questions. But Prince Louis's secrets can only be concealed for a very long time. Additionally, when the leak did happen, it didn't trickle. The truth burst forth. It wasn't meant to get away. But then everything changed. Using just one encrypted message, an unidentified person shocked the royal media. Frightening and definitely genuine leak from the depths of the palace medical wing. Who leaked it and why now? The message appeared suddenly. One encrypted message sent to an experienced reporter who uncovers others' stories wouldn't. At first, it was impractical, too intimate, too sensitive, and too dangerous to be true. But that file included data that could only be familiar with a limited number of individuals within the royal gates. The journalists didn't think twice because the medical terminology, dates, comments, and the details were quite precise. And the information was very unnerving. True, the story was too explosive to disregard. A fire started in a few hours. The email included what appeared to be an inside royal memo. Terrible, clinical, chilly, and indisputable. It explained a diagnosis which had never been disclosed to the public and mentioned internal disagreements about the outcome's disclosure. Most damningly, it showed that the outcomes had been known for several weeks. The results were terrible. It was also a betrayal, a health crisis. A framework derived from the collapse of secrecy was coming from within, not just a kid in peril. A complete scale, the media in the palace became terrified. Employees, communication was non-existent. They called for urgent meetings. In charge of it wasn't just harm that was needed. It was now that the leak had occurred. It was too late. Fled the confines. It was by itself. News outlets grabbed it up right away. Conjectures erupted from the headlines. Without verification, specialists shared their thoughts on the situation. Furthermore, the hashtag pray, because Prince Louis became widely popular around the world. The public was taken by surprise and devastated and sought an explanation. But the palace couldn't supply them. Not quite yet. Catherine gained knowledge through her phone, not from her spouse or helpers. A title containing notification she hadn't given her approval, which she hadn't been warned or even planned. Insiders claim that she was furious at the silence that had forced someone to behave covertly, as opposed to either the leak or the journalist. At the group that had determined that the only method to reveal the truth was by desperation. The muttering then began. Who was in charge? Was Catherine acting sabotaged inside? Or was it someone else, near her? Some claimed it was an act of rebellion. Others whispered about intentional sabotage, a strategy to instigate chaos. Behind closed doors, names were floated. Workers were interrogated. Their loyalty was called into question. But the leak has demonstrated more than merely an issue. A lie had come to light. The palace has devoted decades to crafting its shimmering outside. However, it had been torn apart. Through it. Furthermore, it had placed in the midst of a storm. Catherine that was outside of any spin's control. Physician, however, the test result itself distinguished itself from the others, in spite of the perplexity and the awful reality that was exposed. This wasn't just a diagnostic. The discovery would be shocking. The people alter the lineage of the royal family and leave Catherine haunted for all time. The heir left the room as soon as the physician completed speaking. How does this represent Prince Louis and the future of monarchy? Catherine's worries were confirmed by the report that was leaked. However, its contents were much more extensive. uncommon neurologically progressive and inherited strangeness. The illness had slipped away early, identity up until it abruptly showed signs that were not possible to disregard. Using sterile separation, physicians explained it, but the meaning of their words was far from ice, just the management. And no, there was a guarantee of normalcy. Years of concern were the only remedy. The prognosis was dire yet guarded. The challenges Prince Louis would encounter would evolve over time. Mental growth, motor abilities, as well as speaking. Each success would be difficult. Days of progress could take place. However, there would also be reversals. The future would be not sure, nor for him, nor for the relatives, and certainly not for the monarchy that had previously anticipated he would stand behind his brother one day on the waving from the balcony of Buckingham Palace to a sea of obedient subjects. The consequences were instantaneous in the palace. The advisors rushed, not out of sympathy, but for their personal security. The lack of care is no longer a subject of discussion. They had to handle the repercussions. What would occur to the monarchy's standing, succession, as well as the emergence of stability, which it so urgently desired to maintain in the event that Prince Louis was no longer a possible heir. Messages and plans required revision. Additionally, somewhere in a mother was in the middle of it all. Catherine, who was shattered. Ultimately, behind the royal gates, the reality is seldom as straightforward as the assertions made available to the public. Behind the rituals, the crowns, and the meticulously refined customs, there are people still existing, and parents are making hard choices, and a youngster was apprehended midway through a system that has lasted for centuries. Regarding Prince Louis, the future today appears to be significantly different from the one he once dreamed about. The appears on the balcony, the royal rituals, as well as the anticipations of monarchy might become less prominent, swapped out for a much more intimate journey, one that prioritizes kindness, integrity, and the silent struggle for normally out of sight of the outside world. However, the inquiries pertaining to this narrative are far from finished. Was the castle really safeguarding a young prince or defending the institution's own reputation? And how many secrets are still hidden behind those old walls? Just one thing is unquestionable. The instant Prince Louis vanished from the public eye, something the monarchy underwent a permanent change. If this chapter turns into a narrative about empathy, discretion, or change will rely on what transpires next. Now, we would like to speak with you. Do you think the royal family made the correct choice for a Prince Louis? Or do you believe that there is still more to this tale that has the public not been informed? Give your comment below with your ideas. Additionally, if you're looking for more in-depth royal divides, hidden palace tales, secrets, and the times when the headlines don't completely elucidate, ensure you like this video, turn on the channel and subscribe. Alerts to ensure you don't miss anything coming up next. Crowned Insider is this, and we'll see you in the upcoming tale.